Ni hao, glad to have you again. We have finished downloading and setting up our development Parse Server backend. Now let's start all the server components and try to make sense of the backend system. Starting with making sure our backend MongoDB service is up and running by going to Services, click M. Okay, it is not running. We'll start it. Then we start the Parse server inside the node runtime environment. We'll do that by going to the Parse server directory. One way of doing that, you can hold Shift while not selecting a file. Hold Shift and right click. Then Windows 10 will give you this option, Open PowerShell window here. So right now we are pointing to the Parse server directory. I don't really like using PowerShell. PowerShell is kind of an advanced version of command prompt. So it's a powerful terminal, but I just prefer command prompt. But this is convenient in such a way that you don't have to do all that changing of directory to make your working directory to be the directory where Parse server is located. So just going to close this, open a command prompt, change the directory, /parse server, and then run npm start. Which actually translates to node. Essentially, it's calling the node runtime environment and then passing it this index.js file. That is the root file, this file right here. Now thinking of it, I don't really like this parse server example comment, parse server example running on port blah 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 comment. So let's try and fix that, since right now we are not dealing with a parse server example. So I'm going to shut down the server, Control C. Yes. And let's go to the index file, this file right here. I believe that is where we'll find the code. Okay. This is the import of Express. This is where the Parse server class is imported. But that's not our problem. This is the backend code, which we're not supposed to worry about, since Parse server. Aha! This is it right here, console.log Parse server example. Let's just remove the example and just change it to Parse server running. Parse server running on port and then the port. So this is fine. Just a quick fix, kind of not very relevant, but a little bit matters. So let's run it again, npm start. Okay, so now Parse server is started successfully. We can check that. Local host colon 1337 slash parse. Okay, it is working successfully. Of course, it's saying unauthorized because we haven't provided a master key or an app ID. Okay, now to start our final component, we'll start the Parse dashboard. Let's copy this code. We can also use that configuration file we created earlier, but I want to show us something. So let's open another command prompt. Paste it and run. Okay, so our final component has been started. That's the Parse dashboard. We can check it by going to localhost colon 4040. Then voila, everything is fine. So let's try to make sense of what we are doing here. What are the components of this Parse server? What makes it up? So we're going to use this to represent it. First, let's start with we have our localhost development server, which is the computer we're currently using. It has a loopback address. What is a loopback address? That's the kind of localhost term we have been using. One way to check it is let's open another command prompt. If you try to ping, this is some networking related stuff, not very relevant, but I wanted to I want to demonstrate something. Ping localhost, but we want to force IPv4. So actually, the localhost IP, the localhost domain name we have been using to access the Parse dashboard or the Parse or any other service we run on this computer, it actually translates to 127.0.0.1 because of course computers identify themselves with an IP address, not actually a word given domain name. The actual underlying IP address is what really matters. For us humans, names are more convenient. That's why we use name. But instead of using localhost here, you could just put 127 and it would work just fine. It's the same thing because localhost actually translates to 127.0.0.1, which is the loopback address. What that means is in a network layer, when you try to ping in, you're trying to access a server. So when you ping or you are looking at a local, when you are looking at a loopback address, so that means localhost. Essentially, you are trying to look onto the device. It's kind of like it loops back to the device you're trying to access it. In this case, I'm pinging. Pinging is like testing connectivity. So it's like in this case, the device is trying to test connectivity to itself, back to itself. So loopback is very relevant, but also in this case, in this scenario, I'm connected to the internet, so the computer also has a private IP address. You can check the IP address by going to, that means on Windows 10, going to Task Manager, more details, and then performance, then Wi-Fi. And you can see it right here. IPv4 address, we have 192.168.43.49. You can also conveniently check it in all Windows from Windows XP. You can run IP config, and then you'll see the IP address. So your computer can be connected, for example, can have many IP addresses. If it is connected to, let's say, wireless and also connected to Ethernet, so that means it's connected to two different networks at the same time. So that would give it two different IP addresses. So in this case, right now, I mean, sorry, it would be three in total, including the loopback address. Right now, it only has two IP addresses. The loopback address, which is always there, because it loops back to the device, and then this Wi-Fi IP assigned IP address that allows it to connect to the internet. And also something to notice is instead of writing 127.0.0.7, which refers to this computer because that's where all our Parse server components are running, you can also, let me do this one. Instead of using Parse, let's just visit that testing URL, main sub URL. Let's write this IP address 192.168.43.49. So it's the same, it's still the same IP address, but it's still an IP address assigned to this same computer. So you can use localhost or this IP address, which is temporary. What do I mean by temporary? In such a way that it's not really permanent. Right now it's assigned to this computer because this computer is connected to this specific network. If it is to connect to another different network, the network router might assign a different IP address. So It's not static. It's called a dynamic private IP address. So this is networking, not really relevant, but it's just relevant to us because when you're trying to create a development environment, and you're using live device, you are using live device to test your application. This is relevant to you because inside the Parse server you can't really use localhost. You'll be using the actual private IP address of a computer you are hosting the Parse server backend end. So which is why I'm explaining this. So let's go back to our friend right here. So right now this computer has a private one IP address that starts with 192.168 or something, so a private 192, and then also a loopback address which is always there in every device that has a network layer that can communicate using network. So, or even a phone has a loopback address. When you call inside a phone, you try to visit 127.0.0.1. Of course, you have to specify a port number. It refers to that specific phone or a tablet or a server or anything of that. So the Parse server requires two. It has three main components required. A MongoDB service. So MongoDB is where Parse server actually stores all the data, all its actual data inside, and then the Parse server instance that which runs on Node.js. That is this one right here. This one right here. It runs on port 1337. A port, specifically TCP port, is kind of, think of it as if 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 this is a computer, think of a computer as a house. So given a computer as a house, it has many doors, or it can have many doors in which you can enter that specific house. And those doors represent the ports in a computer system. For example, a computer can have as much as 60 something, 65,000 ports. So in this case, we are only using 3 ports to host the three services, the service components that Parse server requires to run. So Parse dashboard is running on port 4040. That would be the door 4040. The Parse instant, the actual logic of the Parse server, is running on port 1337. And then the MongoDB service, which is running on port 27017. And then there is this firewall icon. What that actually represents is MongoDB, if you can remember, is not exactly a thing which the client side is supposed to even know exists. It's supposed to be limited to just the backend server. So mostly, even in live servers in cloud services, the MongoDB or Postgres, the actual database where the storage is, all the data is stored, clients don't have direct access to that MongoDB database because they don't really need to. All they need access to is the Parse instance. So that would be on port 1337. So if you go to the firewall, Windows Defender firewall, you can see that Windows have, this is what firewall is. This is also part of networking. You don't have to really worry about it. It's just something that is relevant to understand, but you don't have to really worry about it. Inbound connections do not do not inbound connections that do not match a rule are blocked. What that means is if someone is trying to, or a computer or device is trying to access this specific computer, our computer where we are hosting the Parse server, if he's trying to access a specific port, so that means a specific door, given in the metaphor that the computer is a house. If someone is trying to get into that house using a specific door, he has to there has to be inside a firewall that allows people from outside to enter that house using that specific door. someone from inside the house, that means a service running inside the computer, can get out, using that door, so using that port number. But someone from outside cannot just get into that house, except if inside the firewall a rule is defined to permit that kind of thing. So in this case, we want to go to inbound rules, though that means the rules of a connection trying to get inside this computer. Outbound rules stands for connections from starting inside the computer trying to go out. For example, when you are using a web browser trying to access a service from the internet. So that would be outbound because you're trying to go out. Your web browser is trying to reach a website outside your computer. Inbound rule, someone from the outside is trying to reach if we're inside of your computer. So we want to go to inbound rules. And then you can create a new rule. The rule can be based on a program. That means you specify the specific program you're trying to permit outside devices to have access to, or you can use port number. Convenient, mostly in firewall administration, you want to stick with port. In this case, you want the TCP port, and then you want to block this specific port 27017, and then click next. You want to block this connection, but we don't really on all domains. We don't. Let's just say MongoDB 27017. We don't really need this rule right here, because by default Windows will not allow outside devices to get into this computer, try access the service inside this computer hosted on this specific port, the 27017. So we don't really need this rule. And something to notice is Node.js has created a rule for himself when we install it. In this rule, when you click it, you can see that the name of it is Node.js server-side JavaScript. It's a permit rule, so allow this connection. That means it's allowed for someone from the outside, so to come inside, so inbound rules, to come inside and access a service on that specific port. But in this case, it's not defined by a port. You can see the ports are all ports. It's defined by the program. The program is Node. So why in this case, the reason why not a specific port is used, it's a program that's used, is because a node program can decide to use any port. In this case, Parse Server is using, where is it? Parse Server is using 1337 because it was given, and then right here you can change the port and that would just be fine. So in the case of Node, you want to permit the application, the node, you want to permit it to use whichever port it uses, and whichever port Node decide to use based on the application running on Node. You want devices from outside to be able to get inside this computer and access that service running on Node. So this is kind of the representation. So the Parse server instance running on port 1337 has an inbound rule that allows devices from outside to access the service. The MongoDB service doesn't have it, hence by default the Windows firewall will block that connection, and the Parse dashboard also doesn't have a rule that allows outside devices to connect inside this computer using port 4040. So hence by default Windows firewall will also block that connection. So thank you. I guess we'll stop here.